Hello and welcome to Basins and Beer with ESA Analytics. I'm Blue Spikes. Today I'm going to talk to you about the DJ Basin and specifically how things have changed in this basin over the last 100 years. The beer I'm going to drink is Sam Adams OVP. It's the Oaked Vanilla Porter. It's 5.8% and 35 IBUs. This is a beer that's been in my refrigerator since last Christmas. That's mostly because I haven't been really excited to try it. It's not my favorite kind of beer. I do like porters, but I don't usually like vanilla flavored beers. But in the spirit of Christmas, since we're almost there, I think maybe I should give this one a chance now. So let's give that a try. That definitely tastes like vanilla. I really don't mind porters, but yeah, that's a little sweet for me. Definitely the kind of beer that I'm probably not going to drink more than one of. But it's good enough to talk to you about the DJ Basin, and let's get started on that. All right, so I've told you before in previous videos, the best thing you can do to get yourself oriented is open the map, turn on your regions, and figure out where you're going. So today, we are going to the DJ Basin. So that's northeastern Colorado, southeastern Wyoming, western Nebraska, and northwestern Kansas. So it's this yellow block in the middle. There's 110,000 wells, and it's where we live here in Colorado. It's where I've got sort of most of my experience drilling. So it's a good area to focus on. Once you know where you're going, you find that region in the pull-down menu, and you hit apply. It's going to take 5 to 10 seconds to load any big basin, which is very fast. If you compare that to your Kingdom projects or your Petra projects, Geographics, they're going to take longer than this to load for sure. So once it's loaded, I open the map, and I look at my gray spots here. As I have indicated over and over, first thing I usually do is look at formations. But today, because I want to look at a historical perspective, I'm going to look at vintage. And I'm going to go ahead and color by TD just so there's something to size the dots. Now, vintage for us is it's sort of a combination of a lot of different dates. First and foremost, if we have a first production date, that's what we use for vintage. If we don't have that, we use completion date. If we don't have that, we use spud. If we don't have that, we use the minimum of any of the other dates that we have. The point is, we're trying to drill down and create a map. You know, that size by actually might have convoluted the map in this case. Yeah, it did. So I'm going to get rid of the size by. And what this shows is, first of all, the outline of the basin, but it also shows, based on this legend that we can pop out here, the oldest wells are here. These blue ones that you kind of see in the background. And then you have sort of your middle range wells. So the oldest wells start in the early 1900s. The middle range wells, so the greens and yellows, so that's anywhere from the 60s all the way through the 90s. So if we hide these red dots here, or if we just zoom in, you can see there are still yellow dots in that area as well. So really the basin that was focused on, 50 years ago, or at least beginning 50 years ago, was this central area. Today, which is the red dots, the more modern wells, we're focused more on the core DJ. So if you're looking at this from a historical perspective, you can see that we've really changed where we're drilling. They used to drill kind of everywhere, and especially in this big broad area in the middle. And now, over time, we've whittled that down to core DJ here and some smaller fields out here and a little bit up in Wyoming. So, most of the wells that are drilled out here are older wells. There are a few down here, so they're still trying stuff out here, but that used to be a real hotbed of drilling, and it just isn't anymore. So that's how sort of the location of where they're focusing their drilling has changed. Now let's go ahead and look at formation, because chances are, if they changed where they're drilling, they're probably targeting different formations. So let's go ahead and sort that. Get our other graphs sized a little better. So this shows that that core area that they used to drill was mostly J sand. So that's this top formation here. And so that means they were old vertical wells. But if you drill it, or if you zoom in, you can see they were also in this core DJ. But if you're up in this area, this northern part of what is core DJ now, they really weren't drilling those J sand wells. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing. So we've changed where they're focusing the drilling, and as a result, we've also changed what they're targeting. And so you can be sure that that's an indication that we have also changed the style of drilling. In this case, the direction. So it used to be they were drilling all these verticals. Out in this area, I mean, look, the map is just dominated by purple, which is vertical wells. And then you see in this core area where we're focusing now, and over here a little bit in Kansas and up here in Wyoming, this is all horizontals. Now, back in the day, they still drilled plenty of vertical wells in this area, and they still drill some today. So let me kind of focus in timing-wise on this map. It's probably a little easier now if I go ahead and size by. You know, I think we're seeing that sometimes sizing by is a good thing, and other times it's not as much. So this is still showing this by producing length. I want to show this by vintage. And the fact that it's BOE is fine. That just shows that there was production. If we look at this timeline now, we can see that it was all verticals through this portion, all the way through the 60s. And then somewhere in here, looks like probably around the 70s, you start to see these blue dots coming in. So these are the deviated wells. So they went from drilling straight down to drilling at 15 degrees or 30 degrees, drilling off at an angle. And then in the 90s, they experimented with horizontal wells. And in 2010, they became all the rage. So that now, if you look at something like this, you drill in, and that's all you see, is just purely these horizontal wells. And I think if I change this to TD, I think this will help us see the dots a little better. Yeah, that does. That kind of brings out these blue dots a little better. You can just see them a little better. And it also shows that the number of horizontal wells, while that goes off the charts here, and the number of deviated wells increases, the number of vertical wells decreases. I mean, you can just see that there are just fewer vertical wells being drilled during this time period. So another thing we want to look at is how, and I think the other thing we can sort of glean from this is over time, as we've changed from vertical wells to deviated wells to horizontal wells, the wells have gotten longer. Because by plotting by TVD versus vintage here, we see that the graph is really just taking off. And so these wells have gotten a lot longer. We're drilling over 25,000 feet in this case. This one's almost 30,000 feet. So, and back in this period, it was more like 10 to 15,000 was the max. So let's look at one other variable here and see, is that also, hang on, it's not, there it is. Sorry, that's sort of pausing on me. Okay, so let's load that up by TVD now. Because I want to see if the wells have gotten longer, have they also gotten deeper? And they have, in fact, gotten deeper. And in some ways that's a little confusing, because if you're looking at this map and you think, okay, if they were drilling out here and it was J sand, and J sand is deeper than Niobrara, and now they're focusing on Niobrara and Codell wells. Why are these wells now deeper than these wells? And it's because this is the deeper part of the basin. So as you go this way, everything gets deeper. And so we can see that if we go ahead and plot by TVD. I mean, that's the TVDs of the wells. So you can see they're definitely deeper over here. And one other thing we can do is plot by a formation top that is within these wells. So we've got tops all across the basin. And so let's go ahead and pick the Niobrara. Okay. And so this is going to give us what essentially looks like a structure map. And I mean, look how good that looks for being nothing more than tops picked within the wells. You do see some outliers, so we need to address those, but this really shows it's very shallow out here, it's very deep in this area. And then, you know what, I'm also gonna do one other thing. I'm gonna turn off this hover data, because I think that will be less confusing. So it takes a second, but it will kick in here. Well, actually, I have to hit apply. Okay, so that way the hover data doesn't keep popping up and sort of interfering with what I'm trying to show. But this really does a good job of showing this is the deeper part of the basin. It gets shallower as you go east, and you see it's even outcropping in parts of Kansas, and I mean, this is where the type location for the Niobrara is northwest Kansas. So yeah, so we're seeing changes that the wells are getting longer and deeper. Now let's look at in terms of well spacing. So one thing we can do is plot how many neighbors each well has. So this is how many wells appear within a specific search radius. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here. So sometimes you want to sort this bar graph by values. Sometimes you want to sort it in increase, like from the longest bar to the shortest bar. So that's what this little arrow does, is are you sorting by the legend or are you sorting by the length of the bar? So in this case, I think the length of the bar doesn't make as much sense as looking at well neighbors. So you can see these wells up here have 67 to 69, and let's sort of not look at the top bucket there, because that's sort of a throwaway batch at the very top. But in the major distribution of the neighbors, you kind of max out at about 70 neighbors. And then you can go down to as few as one neighbor or 0 neighbors, just a well drilled in isolation. And so you can see as the basin has become more mature, the number of well neighbors has increased. And that seems obvious if you are familiar with how these basins are developed. It is a key variable when coming up with well density. And well density is, I want to get both these with well density, is how many wells per section. So you're normalizing how many neighbors a well has over a mile. So it's telling you how many wells per section. So in this case, again, throwing out that top and bottom bucket, because the reason we do that is because you have a lot of extra wells that just fit into this broader bucket. And to get the coloring to work right, we focus really on the wells that fit within this more of a bell curve. So 36 is about as high as the wells per section gets in the DJ, which is very high, and you can get, again, all the way down to 1. If you have 1 well in a section, that's one well per section. And looking at what that has done over time, well, it's no surprise that it's increased over time. Again, as the basin has become more mature and drilled up, well, you're going to have more of these wells per section. And then I think what we should do is turn on the surveys. So this is going to show us primarily the horizontal wells. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can start to see what kind of pattern emerges. So the red areas are where you have the tightest well spacing. The green areas, you're getting down into this 11 to 15, 16, 17 range. And then the blue areas, the blue wells, you just have one well drilled in isolation. And if you're still kind of wondering, well, what does it really mean, this well density? So this kind of pad, which I happen to know was drilled by PDC. Now if I go ahead and turn on the hover data, because I think now we can get some useful information out of it. So you see this was drilled by PDC. This is a well density of almost 34. So 34 wells per section. That is a very tight pad of wells. And then you look right here, this is significantly lower. This is 18 wells per section. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about being a mature basin, looking at different well densities. And then the other thing we can do is start to look at production. And we won't get too deep into this, but one thing I like to go ahead and show here is oil. So let's look at oil production and try to remember where these hot areas are. So this is oil production. So they have a lot more wells, but overall, in a cumulative sense, you don't actually end up with more production. Now you can, it all just depends on how much oil you're getting for every well, but drilling more wells doesn't always equal a better production metric, which is what really is the gist of looking at well spacing. But this talk was supposed to be more focused on looking at how things have changed in the basin. We'll get back to well spacing and evaluating what that does to production in the next presentation. For now, I just want you to kind of process the idea that in the DJ, we started 124 years ago with one vertical just north of Boulder. And now we have over 100,000 wells drilled, 67,000, I think, are verticals, almost 12,000 are horizontals. And so we've transitioned from these vertical wells to these horizontal wells. Wells have gotten longer, they've gotten deeper, and production has gone up in these wells. And we will cover that in the next video. But I wanted to lay some foundation for people who aren't familiar with this basin. So leading into the next video, I can skip some of the intro stuff and get right into the meat of well spacing versus production. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Hopefully you've learned something, or at least familiarized yourself with the basin, and you're going to be primed for the next video. So until then, cheers.